You're now tapped into the Instinctive Midnight Theory, where culture meets creativity beyond the algorithm. I'm your host, King Esseen, cultural creator, creative visionary. Here, we honor the past, build the future, and connect the dots in between. Let's talk legacy. Let's talk story. Let's talk truth. Welcome to the theory. I want to welcome you to the Instinctive Midnight Theory's latest episode. It's an exciting one for me because tonight I'm going to be interviewing the first curator as well as teacher that I've ever met, and that's my mother. It's a Mother's Day season, and Mrs. Charis Bowling is a profound influence on me, and she's also going to be joined by my journey, brethren, creative partner, protector, my brother Daoud Bowling. And we're going to have a lot of fun today, just discussing our history. Welcome, family.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing? How you doing? How you doing, King Esseen?
Doing good. You know, I don't smoke or anything, but I feel like I want a Hugh Hefner pipe. You know, welcome to the mansion. But thanks so much for you all joining me today on the Instinctive Midnight Theory. This is a special one for me because, you know, I'm always wanting to go inside and learn. The same as you, you know, I had you all as my example for that. And to know myself better and to know oneself better, you always have to think about your influences and your reference points. And I can't think of any greater influences than you all, my family, Mom, Dad, and Daoud. Y'all were the first people that I knew and the first people that put me on to culture and art. So I wanted to, you know, give people an introduction to you, but also have you all talk a little bit about your own personal journey, your influences and experiences. And so let's start with Mummy. Hi, Mom.
Hi there.
Okay, I always have to check, make sure the sound's working. No, I'm glad that it is. How's everything? I wanted to start our conversation just by talking to you about your personal experience as a child. You know, you've shared a lot with us, but this is a new thing for us, having this sort of discussion in this form and it being formal. And you are my first teacher, as I mentioned, but you're also my first friend, the first person to share things with me. And one of the first memories, probably my first memory that I had with you was you holding me up to a mirror. And I think it was melted rubber all over my face because I was in our station wagon and I was playing with the rubber, you know, it had melted, and I put it on my face and you weren't happy. And you were like, look at yourself, look at that. And I don't even remember if I could speak at the time. So that shows you that it was far back and I was very young. But thinking about that memory made me think about, well, what are Mummy's first memories? Can you describe any of those for us?
My first memories, of course, are my memories of my childhood in Guyana, formerly known as British Guyana in South America, where I was born and where I lived. My family lived mostly in the country because we were in the early stages. This is in the 1940s of my father's service with the Methodist Church in Guyana and the West Indies. And so mostly I remember being a little child playing outside. You know, we didn't have the benefit, I don't know if we should say the benefits of
Right.
television and radio and all the other modern things that we have now. So it was mostly enjoying the family, enjoying the outdoors, and you know, that type of thing. Yeah.
Do you remember anything artistically or culturally that stimulated you or caught your attention and inspired you?
Well, at that time, you know, we were living in the Caribbean, and therefore the kind of music that we heard mostly was calypso music.
Mm-hmm.
So we heard, you know, I remember the famous calypsonians, of the time, the Mighty Sparrow, Lord Kitchener, and these people. I think Mighty Sparrow is still around, and so the calypsos that were not, shall we say, naughty, were allowed to be played in the parsonage, the mission house. You couldn't play those that were a little bit too over the line.
No saltfish talk.
Yeah, yeah, but most of them were pretty, as what they would say, clean music, and so we heard a lot of that, and when we did have radios, we could hear music, and it was mostly from England and America. That was the kind of music that we heard and enjoyed. Uh-huh.
Right. Do you remember any British or American music that caught your ear?
Mm, I can't remember anything right off the hand, uh, because I don't know. I would be lying if I said I remembered a specific song or something. That all I knew is you're listening to the BBC, and so you heard a lot of the
Hmm.
British music. And then sometimes later on, when they got more tied in with American music, then you'd hear some of the American singers, that of that time. Yeah.
Right. So you lived in different islands. You lived in Barbados and Trinidad, but then you came to the States when you were about 16. Do you remember anything culturally that stood out? Maybe that was a little different than what you were used to growing up?
Uh, yes. Well, we moved. My family moved to America in 1957, and we moved to Crisfield, Maryland, on the eastern shore of Maryland, and
Hmm.
they had I remember a little place I think they called it the teen place or the teen joint,
Hmm.
where we could go and listen to music and dance. And of course, I remember music from those times, some of which are sort of a carryover to the Platters. We'd sing a lot of those songs, Only You, and all of those songs from the and mostly American groups, because they would play in this place. I wish I could remember its exact name in Richfield, but the teenagers all hung out there, and we played whatever was the music of the day. That
Right.
was it. Yeah.
I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you remember that family cruise we took and we saw the last surviving Platter performing. Did
Right.
that
Right.
did that feel almost like a full circle thing? I was just wondering if that.
Yes. 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 It was. It was quite an experience
Hmm.
to see somebody that I used to sing the songs in my head when I was walking to school, to the bus, and then to see him there on that ship, and have him entertain us. And you remember he came to our special family party,
He did.
and so that was very exciting. That was fun. Yeah.
Okay.
Along with those same lines, I know you mentioned Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers.
Yeah.
Yourself was an influence for you. Speak on that.
Yes, Frankie Lyman and the teenagers. That was another group that they'd sing their songs while we were walking home from school or walking to the school bus or whatever. That most, as I said, mostly in American songs. When I think about it, I can't honestly think of any British pop singers. We heard
Hmm.
the classic ones because that was, there were a lot of them on the radio, but of the pop singers, they were all American.
Mhm.
you
Right.
know, that's
Okay.
the
No, that's
Drifters.
right. Right.
Right.
So,
Oh, yes, you're the great pretender. Yeah.
Mhm.
right, the Platters again. Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
definitely. What about Johnny Mathis?
Yeah. We,
Mhm.
we we heard him too. Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And yeah, we liked him. The younger people liked him. The older people tended to sort of drift to him, even though he was a young
Mhm.
singer. But
Hmm.
maybe it's because of his style.
Definitely.
But he was not, let's say, as popular among the younger, the kids. That if you're talking about the age when I was younger.
Right.
Right.
Were you also, I feel like I know the answer to this, but were you also a fan of film?
Yep, yep. There weren't many theaters around. I remember the first. I think it had to be the first movie which I saw was one called I think it was Rock Around the Clock or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
which was in the one theater that was available for miles. You
Mm-hmm.
know, because as I said, we were mostly in the rural areas until later on in the 70s. You know, not the 70s, but the late 50s. So that's Bill. What was that? The guy's name, Billy something, with Rock Around the Clock, and we
Bill
were all
Haley.
excited. Bill, yeah, the Bill Haley and the Comets, right?
Now, was
And
Sidney Poitier in that movie?
no.
Okay.
Sydney was
He was in
he was
Blackboard Jungle. That's right.
right. Yeah, but yeah, those are early. That very early. I think that was like the first movie that brought rock and roll
Mm-hmm.
to the West Indies, and I remember distinctly going and seeing that one. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Now that's
Yeah.
very interesting. So, what about art itself? You know, like painting, sculpture, and anything. Did that have any significance?
Not as much, but we always every island every that we lived in, or and in Guyana's case the country had at least one really good museum,
Mm-hmm.
and so we would see a lot of things, but mostly they were reproductions. You couldn't the small islands couldn't afford to have the kinds of originals that we saw later when we came to America, and but we'd see often uh, reproductions, and or we would see documentaries, maybe you'd call them films about art, so that
Mm-hmm.
we knew a lot about it secondhand and that type of thing. And of course, the original art we saw would have been the West Indian art, the things that were
Mm-hmm.
done and made by West Indians. Like right behind us, you see something that was done by uh, an acquaintance of ours, Rosalind Doughton. And
Ah.
we have a lot of that stuff, that was done, made out of natural, plants and trees from the various islands and countries. And but of the serious art, most of our artists, as you know, usually ended up going to England and America,
Mm-hmm.
like your uncle Frank, who left Guyana and went to London because he would not have been able to find, let's say, a serious art college or art school in the West Indies. There's some economies, let's say, are too small to handle the kinds of things that are involved in making really great art.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the natural things, pottery, and all, things made of the trees, from the plantain trees or the palm trees, we saw a lot of that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Now, did you have any artistic or creative aspirations of your own? Because I knew that you were scholastically adept and an overachiever, some might say. You scored very well. But did you have anything that you wanted to do creatively as it related to music or art? Because I grew up playing instruments. So,
Right.
how about you?
No, I was not very good in that area.
Okay.
Art in school was just an elective that I took when I had to.
Mm-hmm.
Music, your poor grandmother tried to teach the piano to all six of her children who were born in the West Indies, and she didn't have any success. We were not, leading that way. When she thought it might be her fault, she even sent a couple siblings out to other music teachers because she was very musical. She played the piano and the organ, and
Mm-hmm.
she sort of tried to teach us as the way most parents could teach their children. That's what they did: save a little bit of money for the music teacher. So she tried to send one of your uncles out to. That we decided that our family was not musically gifted
Mm-hmm.
since we didn't
Well,
have too much
maybe
contact with
maybe
music.
you were. Maybe it just skips a generation the way that some people are saying that about
That's
art
right.
with solely. Maybe, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
That's
But
true.
no, but you know what's funny, Mom? I didn't know that grandmother played piano. I just, when we would go to her house, I would just see it and say, "Oh, okay, this is something that people feel like homes should have, just in case someone
Right.
could play." But I didn't know that grandmother played.
Yeah, yeah. She played. In fact, when your grandfather met her, one of the things she was doing, she was the organist for the children's choir in Grenada. And he
Mm,
used to sneak up to the church early as a young minister to listen to her practicing, getting ready for the services. And she played, and she would fill in for an organist if she had to at church. But you didn't want the minister's wife taking over the job of of the organist, so that
hmm
all your grandfather's churches had organists, but she didn't try to take that position. But oh yeah, she had great musical training. Like in the days when she was growing up, everything was done like long distance, like correspondence courses. And I even have some of her certificates from when she passed her music exams, because you would somebody would hear it in the West Indies and tell somebody in London, and they would vouch for it. You would have to
hmm
listen to do it there, and you would get the certificate for it. But yes, she played the piano and the organ very well. And I played for a while. I shouldn't say that I wasn't good, because I even accompanied my father in one of his silly songs that he would sing, something all dressed up, and when the ministers had their synod meeting, and there was something called "Won't You Buy My Pretty Flowers," and everybody was laughing so hard at him that I had trouble keeping to my notes. But when I said that none of us took to the piano, I should have said, I did play for a while, because at that point I was 10 or 11, and I remember accompanying him at least one or two of his synod concerts. But
hmm
I did not continue. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Okay. No,
uh,
that was it. That's interesting to learn.
yeah, yeah. I was
Now,
glad you asked that, because that brought back that experience to me. I was
that's
sitting on
great.
a
Thank you
stage.
for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Now, moving up the timeline a little bit, I know that you met our dad in Washington, D.C. You were at that time a professor and assistant professor, and he was still in medical school.
Right.
And you met at a dance. That correct?
Yeah, yeah. We met at the dance, which was celebrating Guyana's independence. We
hmm
were both born in Guyana, but we didn't know each other there. I had left Guyana as a child, 12. He had left when he was over 18, coming to go to college. Went to Inter-American University in Puerto Rico, and then to Howard University Medical School. But it was 1966, and it was when Guyana was getting its independence, and there was a great dance party celebrating it at, of all places, Georgetown University. And I say of all places because Georgetown was the capital of Guyana. That was the name. So there were a lot of coincidences, and that's where we met
I
while
like that.
dancing.
We
Yeah.
talk a lot in terms of cultural alchemy with connecting the dots. So I like how you connected that. Georgetown, Guyana, Guyana. Everything
Right.
is connected. Everything's
Yeah.
connected.
Mhm.
So I brought that up, and I brought up the dance because I wanted to know how important dance is to you. Because I always remember you dancing. This is something that the family did.
Yep, dances. West Indians. Any excuse for a dance. That was it. Baby born, somebody left, got a new job, dance.
Right.
Going on a trip to America or England, dance. We always loved dancing. Your father probably even more than I. I always said that was his, one of his favorite activities. When we went to dances, he always had to be first on the dance floor, and I'd say, "Could we wait a little until some other people?" No, why? And so yeah, he loved dancing, and we all did.
That reminds
My
me of
parents.
someone I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
got
now
the
that
other.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. What did you say, Mom?
I said, no, just got to be out there. Got to be out there on the floor.
Right.
I remember
Express.
the first time we went to an American party, and your dad said, "What is this?" We all sit around and talk. Where's the music? Where's the dancing? I said, well, Americans don't have that at all their parties. They sip around, sip cocktails, and so really, this is a party. So,
That's funny.
because as I said, we didn't have that in the West Indies without you had to have dancing. It's probably changed a little bit now. They're more Americanized, and they have cocktail parties where they sit and chat. But when we were, it was dancing, dancing all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that relates to today because a lot of people ask that same question. Where's the dancing? Because people now are more into the lounge vibe. People smoke hookah, the uh, North African tobacco pipe, and that's become a thing. So people still
Right.
dance, but it's not as popular as it had been for the past 20 years. So that's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
interesting.
I noticed that,
Yeah.
when I went to places, even of people who were, I thought, West Indians, West Indian family relatives, and so, but they
Hmm.
just don't seem to, put out the music and pull back the carpet, the rug, and get on, which was like de rigueur. You had to do that. But back home, that dancing
Right.
was it. Yeah. Mhm.
Right. It's funny. You just used a French term. Language is something that you were, I remember you introducing us to. We got it from both sides of Daoud, if you recall. Dad spoke Spanish, Mummy spoke some French, and we got
Mhm.
exposed to it just culturally, often through film and things of that nature. And I just wanted to know, uh, in terms of culture and broadening your exposure, was that something that you felt compelled to do? Just
Oh
learning
yeah,
about, yeah.
yeah, yeah. When I was in Bishop's High School in Guyana, which was really more high, it's called it Bishop's High School, but it was a middle school and a high school.
Hmm.
I started studying French and Latin
Hmm.
in, I guess, what would have been the equivalent of sixth grade or seventh grade, and then went to Barbados and continued with that. We did, French and Latin. We didn't. It was interesting that your aunt, who Joy, who is 2 years younger than I was in the first class to have the option of learning Spanish, even though the West Indies, were closer to many Spanish-speaking places than
Hmm.
they were French-speaking places. But it's the old colonial thing, we're more associated with France than we are with, any of even the South American countries where Spanish was spoken. So that they had been teaching French for, let's say, 50 or 100 years as the second Latin language, because of course you always had to study Latin,
Latin,
the
of course.
dead language. But yeah, it was the choice of Latin and French. But and as I said in here, it was somebody 2 years younger than I was. It was the first time that our high school in Barbados introduced the choice of Spanish
Right.
for students. Yeah, but we
I'm,
always had a
mhm.
foreign language. That was a requirement. Yeah. Mhm.
Right. I'm thinking that might historically have to do with the British privateers' relationship with the Spanish colonies, because the whole uh, piracy phenomenon that is shown in the movies and such usually is all the other European colonies versus Spain, because Spain
Mhm.
was the first European country to claim the Caribbean and the Americas. It was the British, the Dutch, and the French that came after and who were
Right.
struggling with Spain. So, you never know how that might carry on into
Right.
what curriculum and stuff. So I don't know. It's just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Mhm.
okay, moving along. Now we've discussed you and my dad meeting, and he was
Mhm.
also super influential in our lives, obviously. Um, Now I wanted to talk a little bit about your shared interests in music, you know, with and uh, culture and art. You know, Dad was a film fan. You all
Yeah.
liked some of the same sorts of music. Did you? Can you remember some of the things that you connected and bonded on that culturally or artistically?
Well, as I said, we listened. We had liked West Indian music, so
Hmm.
we did a lot of the West Indian songs, and we also sang a lot of American songs, too. But your dad, had a pretty good voice, so he would sometimes serenade me, and
Nice.
and I remember your youngest uncle Ernie coming out of, he was in another room of the house and he heard your dad singing to be what was the autumn leaves by your, since you went away the days grow long and blah blah blah, singing in a very romantic way. And so your uncle came out of the room and started crying, and so he said, what's wrong? He said, your dad and I were dating at the time, and he said, well, he's singing to you, and you're going to fall in love with him, and you're going to marry him and leave us, which was exactly what happened.
Right.
But but
That's how
yeah,
that goes.
your dad had a pretty good voice. I didn't have a good voice. Your grandfather had a very good voice, and as a minister, he was required to sing and lead the choir, because you didn't always have somebody who could be lead things. And but my mother was not the best singer. She was a great pianist and organist, and I think I inherited her lack of vocal ability. But your dad was very liked singing songs, and as I said, anything from calypsos to songs. A lot of songs. As you said, he was a movie nut from the time he was a child.
Mm.
He would say to me, he said, the only time I stole money from my uncle's dresser was to go to the movies in Georgetown. He said when they found out, I got in trouble for it. But
Oh
he was
boy.
saying how much he loved movies and how much he was willing to break his own rules. And for that, because he loved all the old movies, police type, musical type, Esther Williams, this
Hmm.
dancing, swimming actress movie, any kind of movie he would like. If I said let's go to the movies, he wouldn't even ask which one I was going to see. He would say, "Yeah, he was there, ready to go." Even though he wasn't too much of going to these parties that didn't have dancing, but he loved going to the movies, and from the time he was a child. And as I said, that would be a ritual with us, when, as I said, when it wasn't cold in Philadelphia, that's where we'd be going. And then, of course, when that was mostly, we did that a lot after you guys left, because you remember on Sundays that was when he would take you guys to the movies, and
Without fail.
right, and I'd have a quiet house for myself for a while you all went to the
We never
movies.
thought about that. We never thought that you might be doing that. We were just into our thing, you know.
Right.
It's like, yeah, we're going out. That's what I'm saying. We're going to the movie. It's like, all right, see you later.
Yeah.
See
That was it.
that
He really enjoyed that time with you all. That's on Sundays.
Yes, as we did.
we
Mhm.
we did the same.
Mhm.
That makes me want to ask Daoud, because when we were very young, our main influence, of course, was mommy and dad. What are some things that you remember uh, first being exposed to musically and artistically, things like that in our environment? Do you remember any of that when you were very young? Because you're the firstborn and you were the first one to be exposed to their influence.
Okay, it's like, well, thank you. I'm glad to be here. It's like, well, it's like with yourself for the program and here, and especially with the special program with mom. And going back, I can't remember exact memories, but one thing I remember musically is a lot of riding around in the car with mom and dad and hearing a lot of different songs, everything from like um not knowing specifically who they were, but hearing stuff like Sir Duke, Stevie Wonder, and other stuff that I found out, was songs by like Dr. John and the Spinners, which it was just catchy songs that sounded really cool that you'd hear on the radio on WFIL Philadelphia, that type of
Right.
thing. And so hearing promos and hearing commercials and things of that sort. And then at home, it would be like because I don't remember as much of mom and dad playing that many records. What I do remember is always picking up a lot of the album wax that they had at the house. And I remember looking at them and then hearing a few of them. One I remember very clearly when I was very young that I had no idea was looking at this one album cover that had a very kind of bright color on it with a black border on it that had all these hands around the outside. And it had this brother with a very cool type of apple hat and this sister with this lovely smile and a large afro, and they're both smiling, just like kind of the way that we're sitting now. And looking at it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. It's like they seem like they're real nice, they're having a good time, kind of like mom and dad or whatever. And then later on, hearing the song, it was "Where's the Love" by Donny Hathaway and Roberta Flack. And the thing is, it's like, I don't think I could even read what it was, but I could look at that cover and say, this is really fun. And I think I remember mom and dad playing that record and saying, I was like, it's like, where is the love? And it had like a real nice rhythm and sound to it. And that kind of stuck with me as something I remember mom playing at the house, and then seeing stuff like mom playing Cat Stevens' Moon Shadow and Peace Train, and looking at the album again because it had like it was a teaser in the Fire Cat, and it had like the guy playing out there with the cat. And that kind of probably connects to the thing of like, wow, I really have a real cool connection with felines, with Cat Fuzzy. So I was probably thinking of myself as the same as the Cat Stevens album, and those early memories of hearing a lot of music during that time period, from the radio, from commercials on television, and performances from some of these variety shows, whether it be like the Jacksons or Lola Falana or from Flip Wilson show, and hearing them sing contemporary songs on there, or the guests coming on and doing performances and just saying, oh, that's cool, they got their name in lights, they're performing, and that type of thing. But album wise, I do remember specifically hearing that. And then I remember hearing got a song that ain't got no melody. Dun, dun. And it's like, we'll go around in circles. And it wasn't until like I was in my 20s or so that I found out, that was Billy Preston, and how that was like kind of a song that was popular and was part of the pop scene. And Midnight at the Oasis by Maria Muldaur, where I didn't know exactly everything that was being said. It was like, the Oasis. And then later on finding out what that song is. But those are songs that I remember hearing a lot that were being played either on the radio when we were in the car, or when we were playing at the house, or on television in some way, either through the programs or commercials, that type of thing.
The 70s was such an interesting era because, that's the era, me personally, that I was born into. You were born in the latter part of the 60s, and I'm sure the early 70s had remnants of the 60s and what the goings on and what the zeitgeist was. But the thing that I remember that was interesting was that there was this kind of balanced mid, they have a description of a musical type that they call middle of the road, which some people call pop or soft rock. Now they call it yacht rock. But there was just this interesting vibe in music that touched upon the different interrelated cultures that were, in retrospect, new to existing around each other, integrated neighborhoods, a bohemian aesthetic and thought that was progressive. We grew up in Chestnut Hill, so it was a mixed neighborhood. I thought that that's just what it was. I never could really comprehend segregation until I started to read about it, and that this was the situation in the generation prior to ours. But it seemed reflective in the music and the culture and the type of engagement that was going on. And I just think that that was interesting because, as said, it was reflective in the music. You described mom and dad's, now they would call it a playlist, but it was the album collection, from Cat Stevens to the Carpenters to the Jackson 5 to the Spinners to Billy Preston to Roberta Flack to Stevie Wonder to Steely Dan. I mean, it's interesting, but something that I noticed was that mom and dad were definitely well-rounded with the music. Not to say that the family that I'm going to bring up weren't well-rounded, but the Andersons, who were close family friends, who lived just a few houses down in the townhouses, they were definitely into funk and soul, especially because Mr. Anderson, Cody Anderson, was the program director at WDAS. So while we were getting what we were getting at home, we definitely got the exposure to the funk and soul, which, just like being exposed to your own community within a community, keeps you balanced. It felt similar, and that sort of exposure was important and very interesting to me. Mom, Daoud, do you have any thoughts about that, what I just brought up?
Yeah, and I was going to say, and when you're talking about the balance and what we were able to enjoy, I was able to enjoy what you were listening to outside of the home because you played that in your own rooms, right? I told people, I said, I never told my sons not to have earphones in the house, to listen to their music privately, but they just did it. They had the door open, and that's how I got to learn about, everything from when it went from to Genesis, and to all the way to when you began listening to rap and other things, because I liked it. And somebody said, "Are you sure you told them that you wanted to check on their music and you didn't let them turn it off?" I said, "No. I don't remember saying that to them, but it's almost as if they sort of knew that I wanted to hear what they were listening to, so that the doors were open and I would hear it and I would enjoy all of those people, as I said, from the British singers to the Black Americans musicians, and I got to be very well rounded in my in my musical tastes.
You sure did.
As a result of that,
No, it's like no, that's very true. Going back to what you were speaking about with the Andersons over here being our neighbors, like three doors down. Yeah, what was excellent is that of course they had a lot of the same pop exposure that was coming through a lot of the different influences with television and other stations. But yes, Mr. Anderson, yeah, Mr. Cody Anderson over here is like being the programmer. I'm sure received a significant amount of those promotional records. So when we would go to their house, we would see on the floor piles and piles of these different records that were being played at WDAS, which was a black pretty much soul music station. So I just remember the same thing. Like the first thing affecting me is just the sight of these different records. So seeing different records by Stevie Wonder, seeing records by Ohio players which I wasn't aware of musically, or I didn't connect any of the songs, but looking at those covers, which were really significant because they were very different, racy, and presented
provocative.
The models and the women in a certain way that was catching your attention. So you were always hypnotized by that. Hearing all of those different songs by them and then by like Parliament and Funkadelic and things of that sort. Most of my exposure to that came from the Andersons and what they had there and what might be playing and what they would speak about. Like I remember Bill Anderson, who we knew as Billy when we were younger at that time period. Billy and Kyle, the older brother, how they had the album of the Jacksons, I think, Going Places, where they're all on front of it, and that this was during the time period when the Jacksons were coming and recording in Philadelphia for Gamble and Huff and the TSOP, the Philadelphia, so it's like the sound of Philadelphia, and how they had autographs from each of the members of the Jacksons on the cover, and just being like, wow, look at this, they got the Jacksons. So yeah, Marlon, Jackie, Michael, Jermaine, everybody signed on, that type of thing. And then and I remember specifically also hearing a lot of the pop stuff that I didn't see as much until a little bit later, maybe on television, like Billy and Kyle having Sean Cassidy And then playing, you know what I'm saying, it's just like the Do Run Run, which I didn't know was a remake from an older version of the Do Run Run when the pop thing was happening. And so hearing all of these different artists, hearing that, hearing and seeing Cher during that time period from the Sonny and Cher show, and them having all those records, because the Andersons were more advanced technologically, how they had like a VTR, a videotape recorder, which became the VCR a little bit further on. So we got to see sections of films that were being distributed by those few people who had the technology to see films, from everything from The Fiendish Plot of Dr. Fu Manchu to Enter the Dragon, and maybe a few other things that were available on that early technology. And those soundtracks were also very important. Like, of course, with the Enter the Dragon soundtrack with the down, 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 down.
Right, Lalo Schifrin.
Yeah, it's like hearing all of those sounds was a really big deal. How you would hear that and think about those scenes, and then when you're a kid, it's like us, Billy and Kyle and Derek and everybody. We would get into the martial arts fights, doing the same moves that were being shown in those. So that was significant, of like that intersection of music and film and television kind of really hit with what we were seeing at home, what we caught over at the Andersons, maybe other is like and other friends' houses. But yeah, though that was very significant in influencing how I was thinking and how I would think music and film should come together, or how I was introduced to it, and say, okay, music and sound and film and TV should go this way because of what I'm hearing on the soundtracks of the television shows, whether it be that Hawaii Five-0, The Rookies, and things of that sort. So yeah, that was very important. Especially definitely the soundtracks to TV shows and the film shows, Gunsmoke and things of that sort.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so interesting because as we talk a little bit about film and such, we had a movie theater right across the street from the Village, the Eric Twin Theater, that I'll never forget. I mean, there were a lot of films that we saw there that we continued to see even when we moved away, even though it was only like maybe 10 minutes away. But one thing I remember, and this is, I'm going to address Mummy here. You made a point to make sure that we were well fed in terms of film and plays and storytelling and poetry and art. We were always visiting museums, and you were even taking us to concerts. Like the first concert that we ever went to, I believe, and I say we because Daoud might have gone to one before this, but I remember we went to Six Flags Great Adventure to see DeBarge, and that was an experience. I mean, I'd never seen people throwing underwear and motel keys at a group before, and them just staying focused. And I remember you took us to Fresh Fest in 1985, and that was even more of an experience because that was bigger. Like that was, and I'm sorry, what did you say, Mom?
I said, no, we were saying Spectrum. It went through many names, but that was one of, the Civic Center Spectrum concert place where it was. Yeah. Right.
And, we always joke about what was happening there. There were a lot of kids who might not have been the best behaved. And, we've got our mother there, and she's kind of telling people how things need to go. Don't run through here. Don't do this, do that. And Daoud and I were a little shook. But, I mean, it was such a great experience because hip hop was on the rise. And like you'd said, you'd been exposed to it. You were cool, and you were just making sure that we were okay. And I mean, that was a huge deal. We even knew it then that Mummy is taking us to these things. Dad even he took us to see Dougie Fresh and Slick Rick. Mm-hmm. So it's really, it makes you wonder, because we were MTV kids too. And I know you remember that, we loved MTV, and Dad every once in a while would get on our case about watching it too much. But I don't remember you pressing us about our interest in arts, music, entertainment, pop culture. It's like you were in on it. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like why you didn't, because you were also very, how would I put it? You were very focused on making sure that we didn't fall off in school. But being totally honest, I remember, and maybe this has to do more with my interest, but I remember you, I'm not going to say pushing arts and culture and entertainment more, but maybe that just resonated with me more. Did it feel important for you to encourage us on that level, or talk about a
Oh,
little bit about that?
oh yes, because as you said, it's trying to expose your children to everything, so that they could either decide to continue having a bit of everything or choose maybe just one thing that they really want to follow. And I like them, children, mostly they pick up things from what their parents like, and they branch out on their own too when they hear what their parents like, and they say, maybe I like that, maybe I don't like that. And so it was important for me to go to see what you were enjoying, or that's why I wanted to go to the concerts. We had another family they were very good friends of ours, and the father sadly died pretty young, and he said the son was giving a eulogy, and he said he was just like us. He said, Dad took us to this concert at the Spectrum, and he said, and he had the nerve to enjoy it because he was there mainly to supervise, because you know how these things could get out of hand, and we didn't want our children were young enough to want to see it, but not old enough to go by themselves.
Right.
So we did that, and we went with them, and I remember his son saying that at the funeral, and I said, "Yep, that's just like me and your dad. We ended up liking some of what we were just there because we felt we should be there to see what you were doing." And so, and that's true. And then there are things, especially with movies, where
Hmm.
I felt I should introduce you to movies like Fellini's Small Change,
Right.
but then you might say, I don't want to go to the movies with subtitles and it's foreign. And then you went and you learned to love it. Das Boot. Do you remember that? Do you remember that
Das
one? Das
Boot.
Boot, the German one about the
Yeah, that's good.
submarines. I said, boy, I'm playing a
Was
risky thing
that
here.
4 hours? How long was that film?
I
It
went to
was
that
long.
boat. But they're gonna a submarine thing. I said, but I want them to see this. So then, I took you to see that. And it was funny because I was looking up something about Small Change the other day, and that was actually produced in '69, which was the year you were born. But it was a classic, so it was always around. And there it was at that theater in Abington. And I said, let's go see that. And he said, you sort of turned up your nose. But then you learned to, like the things I liked. I learned to like, the things you liked. I learned to be able to trust you guys in terms of when you would tell me, Mom, you think you want to see that movie, but you're not going to like it. And I would say, you remember that movie with Maya Angelou and with the rapper who was shot?
Oh,
Oh,
Tupac, Poetic
Poetic
Justice.
Justice. And
Yes.
I said, because it's Maya Angelou, I want to see it. I want to see it. And they said, Mom, you're not going to think it's really good. But I think I went against your advice. And but I had to agree with you. It was not that good.
Yeah.
Not as good as
Can't
I
break
thought it would
tradition.
be. But I did want to see Maya Angelou perform because I'd
Yeah.
seen her, in other things and knew she was good. But yeah, I tell people all the time I can depend on my son Daoud to tell me if I'm going to like a movie, and he's usually right. When maybe I don't go to see it in the movie theater, and I end up looking at part of it on TV, and I said, he's right.
No, definitely.
In the same way
Right.
that I was able to say, even though I didn't think you would like to see something like Small Change or Das Boat or even Gandhi,
Hmm.
and
Oh yeah, which was great.
right,
Yeah.
and then you end up liking it, and that's the way people broaden their the scope of their interests by reaching out to things. If you just stayed with what you knew for sure was your thing or was part of your package, you would never grow and learn about new things, and that's how I felt about it. That's why for in museums we don't live in a city without having a membership at the whatever is the one, at least one, maybe two of the art museums
Hmm.
in that
Hmm.
city. And you and I tell people that you and Soli go to the High Museum, for example, probably 50 weeks out of 52 weeks, 52 Sundays of the year. That's where
Just
you're headed,
about.
and he loves it too, you know. And you can't know whether somebody's going to like it unless you give them a taste of it, you know, to try to see it. And of course, you're happy when they do, but sometimes you have to accept they don't, and then you move on.
Right. You know, it's funny you brought that up because, like you'd said earlier, Dad took us to the movies every week without fail, and we would eat together, and it was a
Right.
ritual. And consistency is important to children. And
Mhm.
Soli enjoys films, but he only enjoys them in bites, which I think is a generational thing now. You know, they have a perceived sense of urgency. They want to speed through. But when it comes to art, he'll take his time. And I wanted to develop that sort of consistency with him. So it's traditional. We appreciate your exposure of that to us and being consistent with it. And there's something that you said when I was young that stuck with me because I thought it was deep even then. You were bringing up a film, and I mean, you used to take us to, as you said, Small Change, Seven Samurai by Kurosawa. I mean, just really artistic films. Some I don't even remember the titles as much. And you would take our friends, like my friend Mira. You were confident about what we would like. And some of these films, you know, you allowed us to speak our minds. So when we would hear the titles, we'd say, "Mom, we're going to see that. You know, if we're going to, this like a waste of a movie because I don't know what this is." And I remember one time you stopped me. You said, "Hey, I'll never take you to something that you won't like." And that just kind of stopped me and made me ponder because how would someone know that if they can't see the future? But you were confident about it. But that I think has to do with the fact that you are our first cultural curator, and you made it so that our tastes aligned, and that broadening and expanding and leveling up our taste was important to you.
Yeah.
But you were going to say, Mom, I didn't want to interrupt.
No. I said, you know, it was the same thing with your dad. You know, you liked karate stuff,
Mhm.
and so that was it. Because you remember the karate movies were all rated R, and so in many cases you all weren't the age to go, but it was R for violence, right? But that was the reason it was R, and we knew for some reason because of the way you were brought up that probably wouldn't make you turn out to be murderers. So therefore, we could buck that, and you know, and he could take you every other Sunday to Jackie Chan, who was in all of those people,
Right.
and other movies. But you know, those were as I said, the rated R ones that people might say, well, oh, they're going to see that, but you know, it was for a reason, you know. And there were times when I made a goofy thing, and took you to see Risky Business, and you didn't have any business in there because I did not know what it was all about. I wrote a letter to the reviewer of the Philadelphia Inquirer
That's my
because
Brian.
because I said he probably didn't want to give away, you know, the whole idea that the kids made money from prostitutes, right?
Right.
But I would not have probably taken you if that was it because I had my limits. And so I was very upset about that.
And
And
you knew we were precocious kids too. So
oh
we
my
would
goodness,
catch everything,
I
and
know.
we would also
Because
ask you questions.
I know in the movie, it was, you know, I was sort of semi dark. And when they started talking about stuff and doing stuff like that, instead of looking at the screen, you were looking at me to see how embarrassed I was. And I could see your little eyes glistening there, like, oh boy,
Yeah, it's like I know mom's nervous.
she's probably sorry she brought us here. And all of that. I mean, I was getting furious at the movie, but we stayed to the end.
No, definitely.
That was one example. But I remind you about another example. You remember that where your dad took it was David's 8th birthday party,
Hmm.
and he's what was the name of that movie?
Quest for Fire.
Quest for Fire, right? And it's all and it says it's advertised as I said, but they don't tell you everything, unfortunately,
Right.
because they probably would get in trouble if they did that. And it was about the history of the earth and the way man discovered fire and all of that stuff, right? So it's
Hmm.
David's
Hmm.
8th birthday, and as you're saying, we're across the street from the Eric Twin Theaters. And the kids come, they play a little first, then they're going to see Quest for Fire. I'm getting the ice cream and the cake ready for when they come back after the movie, an hour and a half or 2 hours. And after 20 minutes, I hear the key in the door, and it's your dad coming back with all the kids from David's birthday because of the scenes in that movie that were so gross that he just
Intense.
couldn't stay there. And the kids are, oh, Dr. Bowling, come in. It's not so bad. He said, nope, nope. And he brought them back right home. Not going to see anymore. I think that's probably the only movie that you all have ever left in your life, right?
No, there was a few. Some were just so extremely bad.
No, I was like, yeah,
that we walked out, like
son.
Rapping with Mario Van Peebles, we walked out on.
Oh, yeah?
Exactly. Yeah,
That was
like,
pretty bad.
With Dad, you know, that is like, that was one of the first that is like, as much as he was exposing us to a lot of adult themes, whether it be like going to see The Wild Geese, which was about, you know, mercenaries that were doing all kinds of violent things, albeit throughout continental Africa, or the James Bond films, which had their own violence and sexual things. Being he was present most of the time, he'd be like, okay, that's cool, and I would keep an eye on them and discuss it afterwards. With Quest for Fire, it was dealing with so much of the I mean, it's like with the prehistoric era expressions where they weren't talking, of course, because they were just, you know, because it was so early on. But you know, when they were having, you know, the sex scenes between each other, which were very, you know, very raw. He was Dad, you know, very intelligently said, it's like, this is not something I need to be having my children and my children's like and my son's friends coming out to see, because when it comes back, it's going to look like something, you know, very like, why are you showing the children something that was this horrible, even though it wasn't presented and sold in the ads and in the trailers as something that was that adult. It seemed like something that's interesting for children. Yeah, for children who are interested in like the early things about man, and how this is one of the few films that's showing an expression of what was happening. But it was very graphic. I know it was very controversial during that time period, but we were there in the early weekends before anybody could be told about it. So yeah, I'm glad we were able to come back and have, you know, cake and ice cream and not get into a whole bunch of trouble with our whole families about that type of thing, even though, you know, we were very curious about what was happening. It was a little premature for us at that point. So thank you, Dad, for censoring that much of it, you know, and for doing that type of thing. And yeah, I mean, that was definitely one of those interesting experiences where it's kind of like, okay, you know, all right, this is a move we was like we have to make. And like Mom was saying, you know, taking us to stuff like you know, Francois Truffaut's Small Change, you know, Seven Samurai, The Casual Fall, and all these different type of interesting films was kind of like, okay, they're going to have captions again. Let's see. And it's like, oh no, this is actually pretty good. You know, this is really interesting. One thing I always credit is how, like, you know, you and Dad, but especially you, exposed us to different things from, like, coming historically from performances, whether it be like Bubbling Brown Sugar, and then the stage performance of Yubi, and those type of things, of like how showing how the great traditions of Black music, especially coming through jazz and different early forms and ragtime and things of that sort, were being performed. And I remember that one performance we went to, I think it was one of the closing ones of UB, how UB Blake came out at the end of that at the end of that session, which was really interesting. I didn't know who he was, but I enjoyed the performance. But he was there present, speaking about how he really enjoyed doing this and presenting this last performance to them. So like when we went to see Top Dog Underdog, is like a month or so ago, when we saw like a great thespian, great actor who performs in a lot of plays, TV shows, Jason Lauder. He was there in the audience, and that was one of the things I was like, Jason, yeah, this is my mother. I was like, this is my mother, Charis Bowling. I was like, Mom, this is Jason Lauder, a great actor who does a lot of stuff. But she was the one that took us out to see you be in a lot of stage plays and things of that sort. He was like, oh yes, okay. So he was like, I understand. I see the foundation, because yeah, she really put you and your brother on. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I'm really glad to be in connection with this. But
and shout out to the Andersons again, because Mr. Anderson, as the business manager of WDS, would get lots of free tickets. And I remember specifically that Bubbling Brown Sugar, the UB Blake story, and the Me Nobody Knows. Remember that?
Yes.
Those
with
were
Irene Cara and Ralph Carter.
play tickets, because plays were, of course, a lot more expensive than movies always were, right?
Right.
And so while I would have, your dad and I would have taken you to quite a few, we were able to do a whole lot more because Mrs. and Mrs. Anderson would share some of their theater tickets with us when they couldn't, use them, or when they had extras. Because I always told them, whatever you have, just let me know, because we're ready to go to the theater.
See,
And I always remember that and appreciate it.
Most definitely.
yes, because we were a community. When we went to see Yubi, we went with Robin and maybe some of the other Basses, the Andersons, the Joels. We were all very tight and very connected, just as we are, and we continue to be and still are with those families. And I just wanted to wrap up by thanking you all for being a part of the Instinctive Midnight Theory in this episode and sharing. And, we want to wrap it up here because we could go on, of course. And special thanks to you, Mummy. You're our first cultural alchemist, like the theme of the book I've written for folks to unlock their inner creative. And I wanted to encourage people to ponder who was your first curator, like our mother was for us, and how are you honoring their influence through your own expression? This is all a part of our actualization journey, because when we express ourselves and when we create, we're not just honoring ourselves, we're honoring our family as extensions of family. So I just wanted to add that. And if I could, I just wanted to get any final words from you, Mom, and you, Daoud, as it relates to faith, family, freedom through art.
Well, I just say, first of all, it's a pleasure to be part of this experience. And it was fun to go back and remember things. And I know tonight I'll be saying, "Oh, and I'm remembering something else." I
Right,
wish
same
I
here.
wish I'd said that. But that's what it is. It's all about, as you said, connecting the dots. About having all these dots that you can connect, and being able to remember them, just lying in bed and remember them and enjoy them that way, and then also to be able to share them with others, as we're doing now.
Yes,
Love
I
it,
just
Mom. Daoud.
definitely is like, and I'd like to say, it's like, it was a pleasure and honor to be on the program. Also, thank you for sharing this with us, and I'm very happy to be able to share this here with my mother. So, very much, I would like to say, Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Okay,
Happy
thank
Mother's
you,
Day, Mom.
and thank you for the exposure that she's given us on all these different sides, especially in performance when it came to music, stage performance, television, film, and things of that sort. And even in being involved with athletics and encouraging that, whether for myself, especially being involved and running track and playing soccer, international football, and encourage, and for you and Dad being able to encourage all those things so that we had a wide exposure on all these different influences. Going out, making the museums a common thing where it wasn't some kind of specific, very you know um, highfalutin type thing. It's just like it's part of your experience. So as it becomes part of our experiences, it influences us and lets us know that this is something that we should share, letting us know and being able to communicate over here with Dad and Uncle Frank's work and having that always around us so that we were exposed to it and how that would influence our thinking and keeping us expansive. And so everyone is like, if you do have the privilege of being able to have your folks here, especially during this period for Mother's Day, and they've exposed you to a lot. If they've put you onto a good record, shown you a good TV show or film, or shown you a good artist or a theater, just like enjoy that and give thanks for that type of thing, and maybe take them out and expose them to it this coming week or weekend, because it's very important in bring all those things together. And as Esseen is speaking about, these type of things, they might seem like disparate when you're discussing them, but they actually can go together. And so you can alchemize them and bring them together to influence you into different ways and bring a higher, better expression. So enjoy yourself. Happy Mother's Day, and take yourself to the next level and alchemize all of those energies and powers to the next stage. So thank you very much.
And thank you. And if this episode stirred your roots, share it, save it, and say thanks to the ones who made you fresh. And don't forget to subscribe to the Instinctive Midnight Theory on all platforms and stream the Fresh Since 79 playlist at King Esseen, ESSEEN.com/King's Picks. We are actually going to upload a playlist dedicated to Mummy with the songs from artists that she likes, as well as songs that she introduced to us. And I can't wait till you hear that, Mom, because that was a lot of fun curating. And to learn more about me and Cultural Alchemy, which is a book that's also found at kingesseen.com, and actualizing yourselves as creatives and creatively, please visit kingesseen.com and follow me on all socials at King Esseen. Once again, thank you and thank everyone else for being a part of this. And I hope you enjoy it and get something from it. Peace. That's a wrap on this episode of the Instinctive Midnight Theory. If you heard something that moved you, share it, tag it, build with it. Culture only grows when we grow it together. Until next time, stay fresh, stay rooted, and keep your story in motion.